I crossed the graduation stage alone while my parents threw a Super Bowl party. I cried in the parking lot, then bought a one-way ticket that completely changed my life forever. I stood there holding my diploma like it was the only thing left of me. The empty seats in the front row burned into my eyes. There was no one to cheer, no one to wave proudly. I had worked so hard to get here. All these years of late nights, early mornings, and constant sacrifices, and for what? A cold auditorium, a forgotten family, and a diploma that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The ceremony had been a blur. The dean had shaken my hand, his smile polite but impersonal. I had walked across the stage, my heart pounding in my chest, but as I looked out into the audience, there was nothing. No smile from my mother, no casual wave from my father, no excitement from my brother, just empty seats. And then, as if it wasn't enough to leave me alone in that moment, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The screen lit up with a photo from my mom, a perfectly arranged tray of snacks with a big caption of exclamation points. The Super Bowl party had started. Not one word about the ceremony, no congratulations, just another picture of food. I stared at it for too long, trying to swallow the rising lump in my throat. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. Maybe they had gotten distracted. Maybe they were running late. Or maybe they didn't want to make a scene. But the more I told myself that, the more it felt like a lie. It was the same lie I'd been telling myself for years. That they would show up. That one day, maybe, they would see me. But now, here I was, standing in the parking lot with a diploma in one hand and a phone in the other. The noise of the ceremony still echoed in my ears, but all I could hear now was the cold wind slicing through the air, biting at my skin, reminding me that no one was coming. I checked my phone again. Another message from my brother, bragging about a bet he'd placed. Another photo of my dad, holding a beer, the TV blaring in the background. The game was on, and I wasn't a part of it. Not in their world. Not today. I don't know how long I stood there before the tears came. They weren't loud or dramatic. They were quiet, each one slipping down my cheek as I stood frozen, the weight of my loneliness pressing harder with every second. It wasn't just that they weren't there. It was the fact that they never planned to be. Not for this. Not for me. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my gown and let out a humorless laugh, the kind that stung with truth. I had crossed that stage alone. My family had chosen the game over me, and it hit me like a wave I couldn't outrun. My heart felt like it was sinking, and for a moment, I thought I might break under the weight of it. But then, something shifted. Maybe it was the cold, or maybe it was just the stillness in that parking lot, but I suddenly realized something. My family wasn't coming. They never would. And in that moment, it felt like something inside me cracked, like a door I'd kept shut for years was finally opening. That was when I decided to change. Not in some grand, dramatic way, but in a simple, quiet act. I opened the travel app on my phone, scrolling through the destinations. My thumb hovered over the list of flights, and before I could guess myself, I tapped it. One-way ticket? Colorado. No turning back. The confirmation email pinged into my inbox. I stared at the words for a long moment, breathing shakily but feeling something else. Something like freedom. It wasn't dramatic, no music swelling in the background. Just me, standing alone in a cold parking lot, making a decision that would change everything. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't choosing them. I was choosing me. I stood there for a while, my phone still in my hand, staring at the confirmation email. The cold wind tugged at my gown, and I was too numb to feel it. Colorado, I wasn't sure what I expected from the trip, but it felt like the first real decision I had made in years. When I left the parking lot, it was like shedding a heavy coat I didn't even know I was wearing. The drive home felt distant, like I wasn't really in the car, just going through the motions. I could hear the radio playing in the background, but it didn't reach me. All I could think about was the flight, the new beginning waiting for me in Colorado. It wasn't about running away, it was about running toward something, even if I didn't know what that something was yet. Back in my apartment, I packed quickly, shoving clothes into an old suitcase. There was no need to overthink it. I wasn't staying forever. I wasn't even sure how long I'd be there. All I knew was that I needed the space to breathe, away from everything that had been holding me down for so long. I tried to convince myself that the trip was temporary, that I would come back to my life and my family after I figured things out. But deep down, I knew this was different. I wasn't just going to Colorado for a break. I was going to find something I hadn't realized I was missing. The next morning, I boarded the plane with a quiet feeling I hadn't felt in years. The hum of the engine filled the air as the plane began its ascent, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't waiting for a message or a call from my family. There was no pressure, no expectations, just me, alone in the sky, with nothing but the open space ahead. When we landed, the cold hit me immediately. The mountain air in Colorado was sharp and clean, and I could already feel the weight of my decision start to lift. The retreat was small and tucked away against a hillside, surrounded by pine trees. It felt like the kind of place where you could lose yourself, but in a way that made you find something new. The lobby smelled like cedar and citrus, welcoming me in a way I hadn't expected. The woman at the front desk greeted me with a softness I wasn't prepared for. "Welcome, Samantha. We're glad you're here," she said. Her voice was calm, with no hidden motives, no expectations, just a quiet kindness. It felt like a relief to hear someone say my name without the weight of judgment behind it. My room overlooked a frozen lake, the surface smooth and still, reflecting the sky above. I stood by the window, staring out at the icy surface, letting the quiet seep into me. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding myself until I stood there, watching the ice shimmer under the late afternoon sun. It was like the weight of the past few years had finally started to release its grip. I should have been grateful for the peace, but instead, I felt the same knot in my stomach. My family had taken so much from me over the years, my time, my energy, my finances, and now, here I was, trying to find myself again, but still feeling the tug of their demands. That night, I got into bed early, the quiet of the retreat settling around me. For the first time, I let myself feel the silence. It wasn't lonely. It was just empty. It was a feeling I didn't know how to process. But for the first time, I allowed myself to think. Maybe this is what it feels like to choose yourself. I woke early the next morning, the first light of day filtering through the windows. It felt like a new start. But when I checked my phone, I was immediately snapped back to reality. 15 missed messages, 13 from my family. My mom asking for money to cover a bill, my dad needing a few $100s to fix the car, my brother whining about some lost credit card. No one said congratulations. No one asked how I was feeling after the ceremony. It was just the same requests, the same demands. I wanted to ignore them, but I couldn't. I opened the messages one by one. each request another reminder of how my family had always used me. It wasn't just the financial burden, it was the emotional one. They had never really seen me. They had never really cared. The last message hit me the hardest. It was from my Aunt Helena. "Honey, check your credit report now." She had never told me what to do unless something was wrong. I knew something was off before I even looked. I opened the credit app on my phone, heart pounding in my chest. The screen loaded slowly, and when it finally opened, I couldn't breathe. There were accounts in my name I had never opened. Store cards, a loan I hadn't signed for. The inquiries stacked up like a paper trail of theft. My family hadn't just borrowed from me, they had stolen from me, piece by piece. And the worst part was, it all lined up with every emergency they'd asked for over the past few months. Money they hadn't needed. Money they'd used to fund their own lives, at my expense. The room seemed smaller suddenly. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. I wasn't just angry, I was betrayed. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't just carelessness. It was deliberate. They had used me as a means to their own end. And for the first time in my life, I saw them clearly. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen. The silence in the room was deafening, but it gave me the space to make a decision. A decision I hadn't been able to make before. I wasn't going back to them. Not this time. I stared at my phone screen for what felt like forever, my hand shaking as I reread the message from Aunt Helena. I had always known she was the only one who truly saw me, the only one who had ever offered support without strings attached. She wasn't just worried about me, she was worried about something much bigger. And now I had confirmation of what I already suspected. My family had been using me. All of them. Every last one. I had to make a decision. A real one, one that couldn't be undone. I wasn't going back to that life. I wasn't going to let them drain me any longer. The thought hit me hard. I had always been their safety net. Every time they needed something, they turned to me without hesitation. They didn't care how it made me feel, as long as their needs were met. But now, I was done. I had to stop enabling them, even if it meant breaking free from the toxic cycle I'd been caught in for years. I took a deep breath and opened my flight app again. I had already made the decision once, but now it felt like I needed to make it official. A one-way ticket, no turning back. I stared at the screen, and without hesitation, I clicked the button. The ticket was booked. Colorado. It wasn't going to be a vacation. It was going to be my escape. As soon as I clicked confirm, I felt something shift. The weight on my chest, the pressure in my stomach, it all started to ease. For the first time in so long, I wasn't waiting for someone else to make a decision for me. I wasn't putting my needs last. The flight was in a few hours. I didn't have time to think too much about it. I grabbed my suitcase and started packing. I didn't need much, just a few clothes, my essentials. I didn't know how long I'd be gone, but I didn't care. I called Jessica on my way to the airport, needing to hear a friendly voice, someone who wasn't tangled up in the mess of my family. She picked up right away. "Samantha, you okay?" Her voice was soft, but I could hear the concern. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I'm going to Colorado. I can't stay here anymore. I need to get out." There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear her processing my words. "Are you sure?" she asked. "You don't have to make this decision in a rush." "I've thought about it," I said, my throat tightening. "I need to choose myself. I've always put them first. But now I can't. I can't keep giving and giving until there's nothing left." Good for you, she said softly. You deserve this, Sam. You deserve peace. Her words felt like a lifeline, something solid to hold on to. Jessica had always been there for me. Even when I couldn't be there for myself, I needed to hear that I was doing the right thing, that it was okay to let go of the people who had never truly seen me. When I arrived at the airport, everything felt surreal. The hustle of people, the announcements over the loudspeakers, the smell of coffee from a nearby shop, it all felt so distant, like I wasn't really there. I felt detached from it all. I sat down at the gate, my suitcase beside me, and took a deep breath. It wasn't about the ticket to Colorado. It wasn't about running away. It was about reclaiming my life, something I had let slip away for far too long. For years, I had allowed my family to shape my world, to control my choices, but now the choices were mine again. The flight wasn't long, but it felt like an eternity. When we landed, the air was different. Clean, crisp, like it could wash away the remnants of everything I had left behind. The mountains stretched out before me, covered in snow, their peaks sharp and majestic against the blue sky. It was a stark contrast to the flat, suffocating landscape I'd left behind in Hartford. I grabbed my bag and made my way to the retreat. It was tucked away in the mountains, surrounded by pine trees and the quiet hum of nature. When I checked in, the woman at the front desk greeted me with a calm smile. Her voice was soft, unhurried, like she had all the time in the world. Welcome, Samantha. We're glad you're here. Her words were simple, but they meant more than she could ever know. She didn't know me, didn't know the pain I had carried with me for so long. But her kindness was enough to make me feel like I could breathe again. The room they gave me overlooked a frozen lake. The sun was starting to set, casting a warm glow over the ice. I stood by the window, staring at the lake as the last of the daylight faded. For the first time in so long, I felt a sense of peace. The constant noise, the endless demands from my family, it all felt like it belonged to someone else now. I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to let them pull me back into their world. This was my time, my chance to heal, to rebuild. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. The weight of my family's betrayal would linger, even here. But I was ready to face it. I was ready to face myself. I had taken the first step, and I wasn't looking back. The morning after I arrived, the sun had barely risen when I woke up. The room was still dark, and the air felt fresh, as if it could clear out the heaviness that had settled in me over the years. I stretched and looked out the window at the frozen lake, the sun just beginning to rise over the mountains, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges. It was quiet here, too quiet, but in the best way. I hadn't realized how much noise had filled my life until I left. The constant texts, the phone calls, the guilt that always followed me wherever I went. It was like I had been living with a shadow, one that never let me breathe. But now here, there was nothing but stillness. It was almost uncomfortable. I got up, made a cup of coffee, and stood by the window, again watching the light change. I felt the silence pressing against me, and for the first time in a long time, it wasn't suffocating. It was freeing. I realized I hadn't really stopped to breathe in years. The retreat itself was simple, tucked away on a quiet hill surrounded by pine trees. It smelled like cedar, with a hint of citrus from the lobby's scent diffuser. The whole place felt calming in a way I hadn't known I needed. The first few hours passed slowly, almost lazily. I walked around the property, letting the cool air wash over me, breathing it in like I had never felt it before. The stillness of the mountains wrapped around me, and for a while I forgot everything I had left behind. But as the day wore on, the quietness turned into something else. It started to feel more like loneliness. I checked my phone out of habit. More messages. I had known they would come. My mother was asking for money again. My father needed help with the house. My brother, as usual, was complaining about some small problem that barely mattered. None of them said anything about me. Nothing about the graduation. Nothing to show that they had even noticed I was gone. I felt that familiar pang of anger rising up again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't the same helpless frustration I had lived with before. It was sharper. It was clearer. I couldn't go back to that. I sat down in the small cabin's living room, holding my phone, staring at their messages. Part of me felt guilty for even being upset. After all, I had always been the one to help them, hadn't I? But as I read through their requests, I started to realize something. They had never cared about me. Not in the way I needed. They cared about what I could do for them. This wasn't just a momentary lapse on their part. This was who they were. This was who they had always been. I hadn't fully processed it until now. I had been so desperate for their approval, so desperate to prove I was worth their love, that I hadn't seen how little they actually saw me. My hands shook as I set the phone down. I wanted to yell at them, to call them out for everything they had done. But I knew better than that. That wouldn't fix anything. It would only drag me back into the same toxic cycle I had been stuck in for years. Instead, I took a deep breath and decided I needed to make a change. Not just for them, but for me. I stood up and walked outside, the cold air hitting my face as I stepped onto the porch. The view was breathtaking, the lake shimmering beneath the mountains. I closed my eyes and let the stillness wash over me. I had been so focused on making everyone else happy, on fulfilling their expectations, that I had forgotten to take care of myself. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Walking away from everything I had known, the guilt, the family dynamics, the constant emotional toll they had taken on me, wasn't going to happen overnight. But being here, away from it all, I finally realized that I had a chance to rebuild, to find out who I was outside of their expectations. I sat on a bench by the lake, the cold wood beneath me, grounding me in the moment. It felt like the start of something new, something I had been waiting for without knowing it. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in so long, I felt a spark of hope. The next few days passed in a blur. I spent them walking around the property, reading, and trying to clear my head. I found myself enjoying the quiet more than I ever thought I would. It wasn't as lonely as I had imagined. It was peaceful. But even in this peaceful place, the anger and betrayal from my family lingered. I had to face it. I had to let it out, or it would keep holding me back. That's when I decided to check my credit report again. My Aunt Helena had suggested I do it, and I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. My stomach turned as I opened the app, feeling the weight of what I might discover. But this time, when I looked at the screen, I wasn't surprised. There were more accounts in my name, more loans I hadn't taken, more charges I didn't recognize. They had done this to me for months, maybe longer. Every time they asked for money, it had been for something more than what they said. I couldn't ignore it any longer. This was it. The final straw. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. For years, I had been tangled in their web, trying to make everything right, trying to fix things that weren't my responsibility to fix. But now, I was done. I couldn't be their scapegoat anymore. I put the phone down and stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the mountains again. It wasn't the first time I'd made a decision like this, but it was the first time it felt real. This was my life, and I wasn't going to let them ruin it anymore. This was my time. The days at the retreat began to blur together. I spent them in a haze of quiet reflection, pacing the grounds, breathing in the mountain air, and trying to make sense of everything. The anger I had been holding onto slowly started to settle. It was still there, but it was less consuming, less urgent. I was beginning to feel the weight of the past few weeks slip off, and for the first time, I was able to breathe without the constant pressure of guilt hanging over me. But there were still moments when the reality of what had happened hit me hard. My family had crossed a line I couldn't ignore. Not anymore. I kept replaying the details in my mind, the financial manipulation, the lies, the countless times they had taken from me and never given anything back. It wasn't just the money, it was the emotional toll, the years of feeling like I wasn't enough unless I was helping them. I had always convinced myself that I could fix things, that I could make them proud. But now I saw it for what it was, a cycle. A cycle I couldn't keep feeding. The hardest part was facing the truth. That was the moment I realized I had been holding onto the wrong idea of family. I had spent my whole life trying to prove my worth to people who didn't even know who I was. I spent a lot of time at the retreat thinking about that, about who I had been before I left and who I was becoming. The woman sitting in the cabin by the lake, looking out at the mountains, wasn't the same one who had boarded that plane from Hartford, but despite the peace the retreat offered, I knew I couldn't stay forever. The trip was never meant to be an escape. It was meant to be a way to gain some perspective. And now, with that perspective, I knew what I had to do. I had to confront the reality of my family's betrayal. A few days after arriving, I called my Aunt Helena. She was the only one who had shown me kindness, the only one who hadn't used me or expected anything from me. I owed her an explanation, and more than that, I needed her advice. "Samantha," she said when she picked up, her voice soft and steady. "How are you feeling?" "I'm okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm starting to see things more clearly, but there's so much to deal with. So much I need to fix." "Don't fix it all at once," she said. "Take it one step at a time. You've already done the hardest part, leaving." I was quiet for a moment, letting her words settle. It was hard to admit, but she was right. Leaving had been the hardest thing I'd ever done. And now, I had to face the consequences of that choice. I had to make sure I wasn't going back to the same cycle, the same manipulation. "I checked my credit report," I said, my voice shaking. "There are accounts in my name that I didn't open. Loans, store cards. It's all there. They've been using me." Helena was silent for a moment, and I could hear the concern in her voice when she finally spoke. "I'm so sorry, Samantha," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I hoped I was wrong. I wish I had seen it sooner. But I'm glad you're finally seeing the truth." "I can't go back, Helena," I said, my voice firm. "I need to stop giving to them. They've taken enough from me." "I know, sweetheart," she said gently. "And you'll get through this? You have to fight for yourself now. You've been fighting for them for so long, but now it's time to fight for you." Her words hit me hard, but in a way, it was what I needed to hear. I had spent so long fighting for everyone else, never thinking to fight for myself. Now it was time to change that. I don't know how to do this, I said, the doubt creeping back in. How do I fight them? How do I stop caring about them when they've always been my family? You'll have to take it one step at a time, she said. And when you're ready, I'll be here. You don't have to do this alone. I ended the call feeling a little lighter, but also heavier with the weight of the next steps I would have to take. But the path was clear. I couldn't stay in the past, trying to please them. I couldn't keep pretending that their love was enough. I had to fight for my own future. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't expected. I knew what I had to do. I had to take control of my life, and that meant confronting my family. I couldn't let them continue to manipulate me. I had to set boundaries, even if it meant cutting ties with them completely. I took a deep breath and sat at the small desk by the window, the mountains stretching out before me. I pulled up the credit app on my phone again, determined to face the reality of what had been done. But this time, when I looked at the accounts, I didn't feel the same sense of helplessness. I didn't feel trapped. I felt empowered. I knew I had the strength to take action. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to fight back. I wasn't going back to that life. Not now. Not ever. I returned home, my heart beating faster with every step I took toward my apartment. The flight back from Colorado had been quiet, but now I was back in the real world, and everything felt too loud. Too heavy. I had made the decision to change my life, to stand up for myself, but I had no idea how hard that was going to be. As I approached my apartment building, I saw the familiar silhouette of my father's car parked outside. My stomach twisted. They had shown up. It had only been a few days since I left, but I knew what this meant. They hadn't forgotten about me. They hadn't let me go. I opened the door to find my father standing in the hallway, his arms crossed. His face was tight with frustration. Behind him, my mother was standing, her hands wringing the sleeves of her sweater, and Mason was scrolling through his phone, as though he didn't have a care in the world. "Annabelle," my father said, his voice low but forceful, "we need to talk." I paused in the doorway, my heart pounding. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. "No, we don't," I said, my voice more steady than I felt. "I don't owe you anything anymore." The words hung between us, heavy with truth. My father's eyes narrowed, and I could see the anger bubbling beneath the surface. But it wasn't just anger I saw, it was fear. Fear that he was losing his grip on me. "You think you can just walk away from us?" he asked, his voice rising. "You think you can just cut us off like this?" "I'm not cutting you off," I said, my voice finally breaking through the silence. "I'm protecting myself from you, from all of you. You've used me for far too long." My mother stepped forward, her face softening. "Annabelle, sweetheart, please," she said, her voice trembling. "We didn't mean to hurt you. We just—" "No," I interrupted, my voice steady but firm. "You've been using me for years, and I've let you take everything from me because I thought I had to. But I don't. I'm done." The silence in the room was deafening. I could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on me, but this time, I refused to let them control me. "We need money, Annabelle," Mason said, his voice casual, as though it was just another day. "Dade's car broke down, and Mom needs help with the bills. You're the only one who can help us." I shook my head. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm done." My father took a step forward, his face flushed with anger. "You're being selfish." You think you can just walk away from your family like this? You think we're just going to let you ignore us? I'm not ignoring you, I said, my heart pounding in my chest. I'm just choosing to live my own life. And if that means cutting you out, then so be it. The tension in the room thickened as I stood there, facing the people who had always been my world. I felt the old guilt rising up inside me, but I pushed it down. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me anymore. I wasn't going to let them use me as a crutch. My father let out a low, frustrated sigh. You're making a mistake, Annabelle. No, I said, shaking my head. I'm not. I've been making mistakes for years by letting you all control me. But not anymore. I walked past them, my head held high, and closed the door behind me. My heart was racing, but there was a sense of calm settling over me that I hadn't felt in so long. For the first time in my life, I was standing up for myself, and it felt like a weight had been lifted. I pulled out my phone and texted my Aunt Helena. It's done. I typed, my fingers shaking. I told them, I'm done helping them. Her response came almost immediately. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. You did the right thing. You're going to be okay. I stared at the screen, the words sinking in. I wasn't just okay. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally in control of my own life. The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork and phone calls. I contacted a lawyer, and together, we began the process of securing my accounts and getting everything in order. I had to make sure nothing like this could happen again. It was exhausting, but it was also freeing. Each step I took, each action I took to protect myself, felt like I was reclaiming a part of myself I had lost along the way. Then came the moment when I realized what I had done. I had set boundaries. I had made the decision to protect myself, and nothing, no one was going to take that away from me. I didn't know what was next. I didn't know how my family would react. But I knew one thing. I was no longer afraid of them. I was no longer afraid of losing them because, in reality, I had already lost them long ago. I looked out the window at the city below, the lights twinkling in the distance. This was my life now, and I wasn't going to let anyone control it. Not my father, not my mother, not Mason. I was in charge of my future, and for the first time, I felt free. It had only been a few weeks since I confronted my family, but it felt like a lifetime. My life had changed so much in such a short amount of time. I was still adjusting to the reality of standing up for myself, of finally breaking free from the constant pull of my family's demands. But I wasn't done yet. There was still the matter of facing them in a way that I couldn't have anticipated. I had been invited to speak at a business leadership conference in Portland. It wasn't something I had ever considered before. It felt like a dream, like the kind of thing that happened to other people. But when they asked me, I felt like this was another moment where I could take control of my narrative. I was going to tell my story. Not just about finances, not just about the work I had done to rebuild, but about everything that had led me to this moment. It was time to own my truth. As the date for the conference approached, I prepared myself for what was coming. I practiced my speech, worked through the emotions of telling my story, and did my best to block out any doubts that crept in. I couldn't afford to hesitate anymore. When the day arrived, I dressed carefully, picking a blazer that made me feel confident. I wanted to look the part, to feel the part. As I stood backstage, waiting for my cue, I felt a wave of nervousness that caught me off guard. I had shared pieces of my story before, with close friends, with my aunt, even in therapy, but this was different. This wasn't just a private conversation. This was public. This was me standing in front of hundreds of people, sharing the truth I had kept hidden for so long. The applause from the audience washed over me as I stepped onto the stage. The bright lights focused on me, and for a brief moment, I felt small, like the weight of the world was pressing down on me. But then something inside me shifted. I didn't have to shrink. I didn't have to apologize. This was my moment. I adjusted the microphone, my hands slightly trembling. I looked out at the crowd, trying to find a familiar face, but all I saw were strangers. I took a deep breath, and as I started to speak, I felt my confidence return. "Thank you for having me," I began, my voice steady but still holding that nervous edge. "Today, I want to talk about a crash that happened in my life. Not the kind that happens on the freeway, but the kind that happens when your foundation, everything you've built, crumbles, and how I learned to rebuild." The words flowed more easily as I spoke, the story pouring out of me. I shared the pain of my graduation day, the abandonment I had felt, the betrayal that followed. I didn't hold back. I spoke about my family's financial manipulation, how they had used me for their own gain, and how it had taken me years to see it. How, in the end, I had to choose myself. As I neared the end of my speech, I could see the audience leaning in, their attention focused on me. I wasn't just telling my story anymore, I was making a point. I was showing them that it was possible to rise from the wreckage, to reclaim your life, even when everything seemed lost. That's when the doors to the ballroom burst open. At first, I thought it was just someone walking in late, but then I heard a voice I recognized. "That's our daughter." My father shouted, his voice cutting through the room. I froze. My heart skipped a beat as I saw him, my mother right behind him, and Mason trailing behind them with his phone in hand, ready to record. They had followed me here. They had shown up at my most vulnerable moment, not to support me, but to tear me down. I felt the blood rush to my face, the familiar mix of anger and shame twisting inside me. For a split second, I wondered if I could just disappear, if I could shrink down and make it all stop. But then I remembered I wasn't that person anymore. "Security," I said calmly, my voice cutting through the tension in the room. "Please remove them. They are in violation of a court order." I could hear the gasps from the audience, and for a moment everything went still. My father's face turned red with anger. He started to shout, but the security guards moved in quickly, escorting him and my mother out of the room. Mason, still recording, started to shout too, but no one was listening. "Tell them how heartless you are," he yelled, his voice full of accusation. "I didn't respond. I didn't need to." The audience was silent, watching as my family was escorted out. But in that silence, I realized something. I had taken control. I had not only stood up to my family in private, but now I had done it in front of the world. I had chosen myself. Once the doors were closed, I took a deep breath and returned my focus to the microphone. The weight of what had just happened hit me, but I pushed through it. "I'm sorry," I said into the microphone, my voice calm but steady. That's the reality of what happens when the people closest to you can't see you for who you are. But I'm not here to talk about them. I'm here to talk about the importance of knowing your worth, of fighting for your future, even when the people you love don't understand it. The room remained silent for a moment, and then the applause started. It wasn't loud at first, but it grew as people stood and clapped. It was the kind of applause that didn't just acknowledge what I had done. It acknowledged the courage it took to stand in front of a room full of strangers and tell them the truth about who I was. I took a deep breath, letting the applause wash over me, and when I spoke again, my voice was stronger. I'm here today because I chose myself, and if my story can help just one person realize they can do the same, then it was worth it. The applause didn't stop, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel alone. The months that followed were nothing like I had imagined. When I left for Portland, I didn't know what would happen, didn't know where I'd land. But I did know one thing. I couldn't go back to the life I'd known. Portland was everything I needed. It was quiet, but not too quiet. It was busy enough to keep my mind active, but still offered a sense of peace that I had been craving. The city was full of new possibilities, and for the first time in a long time, I could breathe without the constant weight of my past pressing on me. At work, I finally felt like I was being seen for who I truly was, not just what I could do for others, but what I had to offer as a person. My colleagues respected me, and I had a sense of accomplishment that I had never felt back home. I was beginning to understand that my worth didn't come from how much I could give, but from who I was at my core. It wasn't always easy. I still carried the scars of my family's betrayal, still felt the pang of guilt every time I thought about them. But with each passing day, I learned to let go of their expectations, their manipulations. I had to remind myself that their choices weren't my fault. I couldn't fix them. Then, one day, a letter arrived in the mail. It wasn't from my family, but from my lawyer, letting me know that the restraining order against them had been upheld. My credit had been restored, my accounts secured, and I was officially free from their control. For the first time, I felt like I had truly taken back my life. The relief was overwhelming. I didn't realize how much I had been holding onto until that moment. It was like a door had been unlocked, and the chains that had bound me for so long had finally been broken. But there was still a part of me that wasn't ready to fully let go. I continued to grow in Portland. My job was flourishing, and I made a few close friends who respected me for who I was, not for what I could provide. But the emotional scars were still there. I hadn't fully processed everything, and sometimes the old doubts crept in. I still wondered if I was worthy of this life, if I truly deserved the peace I had found. But every day, I reminded myself that I had chosen this. I had fought for this. Then one evening, I got a call that I wasn't expecting. It was from the conference organizers, inviting me to speak again. But this time, it was different. They asked me to share my story of resilience, of overcoming adversity, and of rebuilding my life from the ground up. I was hesitant at first. It felt like opening up a part of myself that I wasn't sure I was ready to revisit. But then I remembered the strength I had found, the way I had taken control of my own story. I knew I couldn't keep hiding from it. My story wasn't just mine anymore, it belonged to anyone who needed to hear it. When the day of the event arrived, I was more nervous than I cared to admit. The ballroom was grand, filled with rows of seats and soft lighting. The audience was quiet, waiting for me to speak. As I stood backstage, I tried to calm my nerves. I had spoken at conferences before, but this was different. This was my truth, my journey, all laid bare for the world to hear. I stepped onto the stage, my heart pounding, but this time I felt ready. I wasn't the same person who had stepped off the plane in Portland months ago. I wasn't the same person who had cried in the parking lot, feeling like the world had abandoned her. I took the microphone in my hand and smiled at the audience. "Thank you for having me," I said, my voice steady. "Today, I want to talk about something that I never thought I'd have the courage to share. About rebuilding after everything falls apart. About how the hardest battles aren't always fought on the outside, but in the quiet moments, in the choices we make for ourselves, when no one is watching." As I spoke, I could feel the room leaning in, the audience hanging on every word. I told them about my family, about the years of emotional manipulation, about the pain of realizing that the people I had loved the most had used me. I shared my journey of reclaiming my life, of choosing myself for the first time. And when I finished, I didn't feel that familiar fear of being judged. I didn't feel the weight of my family's expectations or the shame of their absence. Instead, I felt proud of the woman standing on that stage, telling her story not to gain sympathy, but to show others that they, too, could find strength in the face of adversity. The applause was overwhelming. It wasn't just polite applause, it was real. It was people recognizing the courage it took to walk away from everything I had known, to rebuild, and to finally take control of my life. As I walked off the stage, I realized something important. This was the first time I had truly stepped into my own power. I wasn't just talking about surviving anymore, I was talking about thriving. I had built a new life from the wreckage of my past. And for the first time, I truly believed that I deserved it. That night, as I sat in my hotel room, I reflected on how far I had come. I wasn't the scared girl in the parking lot anymore. I was someone who had fought for herself, who had chosen herself over the expectations of others. And as I looked out at the city below, I realized something else. I wasn't alone anymore. I had found my place. I had found my voice. And for the first time, I was truly at peace